Hinduism is the world's third largest religion. Over 15% of the world's population and almost 80% of India's population identify as Hindu. Hinduism is also considered the world's oldest religion. But more than being a religion, Hinduism is a way of life. In fact, the Indian High Court in 1995 had this to say about Hinduism. The Hindu religion does not claim any one prophet. It does not worship any one god. It does not subscribe to any one dogma. It does not believe in any one philosophic concept. It does not follow any one set of religious rites or performances. In fact, it does not appear to satisfy the narrow traditional features of any religion or creed. It may be described as a way of life and nothing more. And that's where Hinduism's diversity comes from. No two Hindus practice Hinduism exactly the same way. Hinduism has evolved over time due to cultural and regional influences, leaving us with the beautifully diverse tapestry of religious beliefs and practices that we see today. Hinduism finds its roots in modern-day India. In 1500 BCE, the Aryan people came down from the steppe north of the Caucasus Mountains and settled in the Indus Valley in northwest India. They brought with them their own cultural traditions and beliefs that formed the basis of Vedic Hinduism. Vedic Hinduism was focused on giving ritual offerings to the gods. It's because Hindus believe that these ritual offerings help to keep the universe in balance, and this balance is called Rita. Around this time, the Vedas, which are ancient Hindu scriptures, were compiled. These writings consist of hymns, ritual instructions, chants, and even spells. Between the 8th and 6th century BCE, the Upanishads are compiled. The Upanishads take a more philosophic approach to Hinduism, covering topics like Brahman, Atman, Samsara, Moksha, and Karma. Brahman is everything, literally. Brahman is the eternal, unchanging, divine reality. Our souls are Atman. Atman is also unchanging and eternal. And most importantly, Atman is Brahman, and recognizing that is the key to achieving moksha. Moksha is freedom and liberation from samsara, which is the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Being trapped in the cycle of samsara is suffering, and moksha frees you from that. A Hindu's rebirth is determined by their karma. Karma literally means action. All of our actions have consequences, good or bad. And a Hindu's karma has a direct impact on their rebirth. For example, you could be reborn as a bug, as a plant, as a human being, or as a divine being. Like many other religions, Hindus believe in a god or gods. But what's really fascinating though is that while many would consider Hinduism to be a polytheistic religion with thousands of gods, a lot of Hindus actually view Hinduism as a monotheistic religion. This is because they believe that every god is just one aspect of Brahman and not its own entirely separate entity or deity. Three of the most important gods in Hinduism are Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer, who represent the cyclical nature of life and death. I am a huge reader, so I was very intrigued by Hinduism's literary impact. The two Hindu epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, have had a massive impact on Hindu culture. The Ramayana is the shorter of the two Hindu epics, and it was likely composed around the 4th century BCE. It tells the story of the god Rama, his 14-year-long exile, and his eventual triumph over the demon king Ravana. The Mahabharata is the longest poem in the world. It was likely composed between 400 and 200 BCE. It tells the story of two groups, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, fighting against each other in a struggle for sovereignty. Plot twist, they're all cousins. In the Mahabharata, we find the Bhagavad Gita, which features a conversation between Prince Arjuna and Krishna, who is an avatar or a physical manifestation of the god Vishnu. Arjuna is faced with a dilemma. Should he do his duty and fight and kill his family, or should he not fight at all, but violate his dharma? Krishna tells him to take up the fruit of action, saying that following one's dharma is essential to living a righteous life. Dharma is another really important concept in Hinduism. There's no direct translation for the word dharma into English, but we typically understand it to mean to uphold or to do one's duty. The idea here is that as long as everyone is doing their dharma, from humans to plants, then the universe will remain in balance. This is the theological basis of the Hindu caste or or Varna system. The caste system finds its structure in the Rig Veda from the tail of Purusha, and each caste comes from a part of Purusha's body. The Brahmin are the priestly caste, and they come from Purusha's mouth. The Kshatriya, or the warrior class, come from Purusha's arms. The Vaishyas, or the merchant caste, come from Purusha's thighs, and the Shudra, or the working caste, come from Purusha's feet. The underlying idea here is that everyone must do their dharma for society to function properly. But it's really likely that in this time period, the ruling class created and upheld this caste system to maintain their position in the social hierarchy. Over time, the caste system became much more rigid in terms of structure, and some castes began to be viewed as being better than the others. This meant that a person's caste was directly linked to their family lineage, and any hopes of social mobility were squashed. This led to a lot of violence and discrimination against members of the lower caste. And while the caste system was outlawed in the Indian Constitution in 1950, it doesn't mean that the social and cultural implications of the Hindu caste system are not still at play in modern Indian society. Hinduism is widely regarded as one of the world's oldest religions, so I knew it would have a lot of history. I just did not realize how rich, complex, and sometimes violent that history would actually be. As I was researching, I was particularly intrigued by the golden age of Hinduism, the impact that the Mughal dynasty had on the Indian subcontinent, and the influence of the British Empire on the growth of Hinduism in the modern era. The Gupta dynasty lasted from 320 to 550 CE, and this time period is known as the Golden Age of Indian history. This is because the Gupta kings like Chandragupta I patronized Hinduism and built beautiful temples for it. This time period also had a lot of advancements in the arts and sciences. For example, Ayurvedic medicine, which is holistic medicine, was being refined during this time, and the decimal system that we all use today was created during this time period. The Gupta dynasty declined as a result of invasions and internal strife and conflicts. The Mughal dynasty, a Muslim empire, ruled over India from 1526 to 1858. Some of the Muslim leaders were very accepting and religiously tolerant and allowed Hindus to continue serving and worshiping their gods and even hold high positions in government. However, other leaders were not as tolerant and imposed a tax called jizya on all non-Muslims, even forcing some Hindus to convert to Islam. When the Mughal dynasty fell, in came the British. The British technically first arrived in India in the 1600s with the East India Trading Company, but it wasn't until later that the British Crown took over the East India Trading Company and divided India up into 565 princely states. The British Crown ruled over India from 1858 to 1947. During this time period, the Crown was taking tribute from each of the princely states, profiting greatly while the people lived in poverty. There were many violent attempts to overthrow British rule, but these revolts were quickly crushed. It wasn't until the 1940s that the British Crown began to lose its hold over India due to Mahatma Gandhi's civil resistance movement and World War II. The British Crown agreed to give India its independence, and now India is the world's largest democracy. The British Crown also agreed to partition the country into what is now India and Pakistan. This partition had devastating consequences and has led to a lot of animosity between the two countries and the Hindus and Muslims in them. Okay, I think I am done researching for today. I have learned so much about Hinduism, and I still feel like I am barely scratching the surface of just the complexity and diversity that really define and characterize Hinduism as a religion, as a belief system. So I'll be back later this week to keep researching and keep moving my project along. I think it's so cool to learn about a faith that I don't really know very much about, and to have maybe some of my own beliefs and preconceived notions challenged. So that's been cool. And at some point this week, I will be visiting a Hindu temple to learn more about what their worship looks like. So I think that will be pretty cool too. I think I need to go take a nap and do some other homework. So yay, success. Hinduism has a lot of really cool festivals and celebrations, and I can't name all of them, but two really well-known ones are Holi and Diwali. Holi is a springtime festival that celebrates the harvest and the triumph of light over darkness. Holi is one of the, if not the largest festival in the world, and it's celebrated through music, dancing, and the throwing of colored powders. I've seen the photos of all the colorful powders being thrown around online, and it seems like a really cool festival to be a part of. Now, Diwali is actually coming up this fall, and it is the festival of lights, celebrating the triumph of good over evil and commemorating the return of Rama from exile as depicted in the Ramayana. Diwali is typically celebrated with fireworks and the lighting of lamps and really fun parties, dancing, and music. So I got up really early this morning to come to the library because I wanted to keep working on my Hinduism research and also talk about my visit to a local Hindu temple because it was a really, really cool experience, and I think it really helped me to understand more about the worship aspects of this religion and the reverence that Hindus have for their gods. But first, let's talk about Bhakti Hinduism, because Bhakti Hinduism is one of the major traditions in Hinduism. In fact, most Hindus belong to one of 4 Bhakti Hinduism traditions, and it forms the basis of the worship that I saw yesterday while I was at the Hindu temple. Bhakti Hinduism appeared first around the 7th century CE, and what makes Bhakti Hinduism different from Vedic Hinduism, for example, is that Bhakti Hinduism really emphasizes the importance of having a loving and personal connection with a particular deity of your choice. Bhakti Hinduism is one of many paths to achieving moksha. Most Hindus belong to one of 4 major Bhakti Hinduism traditions. The first one is the Shaivas, who worship Lord Shiva in his various forms. The second is the Shaktas, who worship Shakti, the Divine Mother. The third group are the Vaishnavas, who worship Lord Vishnu in his other forms. And the fourth group are the Smarts or Smartas, who worship forms of the 5 major deities in Hinduism, who are Lord Shiva, Shakti, Lord Ganesha, Lord Subramanya, and Lord Surya. Today, Hinduism has over 1 billion followers, which is such a massive number. That's crazy. I can't even wrap my head around it. And because Hinduism is a religion that does not have an overarching governing institution or a strict specific set of doctrine that everybody has to follow, Hinduism and the way that people worship and practice within Hinduism continues to evolve over time. One common form of worship is by performing puja, which involves prayer and giving ritual offerings to the gods. There are so many videos online of how puja is performed and why it's important, but I actually had the opportunity to observe puja and Hindu worship in person at a local Hindu temple. When I first went to the temple, I was surprised at how quiet it was. It was very, very silent. Everyone takes their shoes off. Some people lit candles or left packages or food or offerings in front of the statues of particular deities as a offering and piece of adoration towards those gods. There was also a statue that was called a Shiva Linga, which is a symbol of Lord Shiva, and people will pour holy water on the Shiva Linga as an act of purification and nourishment. Although the temple was completely silent, there was one moment where a woman began to ring a bell, and as she rang this bell, people gathered candles from around the temple and began to move them kind of in a circle like this while chanting and continuing to ring the bell. I learned after the fact that the ringing of bells is a very important aspect of Hindu worship because the bells are meant to invoke the presence of the divine and also ward off negative energy. When I used to think of Hinduism, all that would come to mind for me are karma and vegetarianism. And while karma is a really important aspect of Hinduism, and around 50% of Hindus are vegetarian, I now realize that Hinduism is so much more. More than just being a religion, Hinduism is a way of life. It's a way of life that seeks to explain the world around us and how we as humans should operate in it by doing our dharma. It's a way of life that has given birth to fascinating innovations, feats of literature, and so much more. This project is just beginning, and I feel like I have learned so much already. I have been challenged in my own preconceived notions that I hold about faiths that are not familiar to me, and I have learned just how important it is to study religion in its historical and cultural context, because that allows you to get a greater appreciation of the way religion, culture, and history are so deeply intertwined. I am just barely scratching the surface of the intricacy and the complexity that makes Hinduism what it is, but I do have to move on to finish my project by the end of this semester. So I'm looking forward to starting to study and research about Judaism next week, which is the world's second oldest religion. I'm really excited. Yeah, let's do it. This is Kyla signing off.